You are listening to The Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ. Join him as he and his guests discover how businesses thrive in California.
Well, welcome to Pilgrim on the 405. We have a great conversation ahead of us today with Mike Goral. Mike is part of one of the fastest growing CPA firms in the country, Armanino, and he has a special practice that focuses on cannabis and hemp. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Will.
So tell us a little bit about how you got to the place where you're focusing on cannabis and hemp in a CPA firm.
Well, I was noticing back in like 2015 as Colorado and Washington State and Oregon were all making adult use cannabis legal, California was going to be the next big state. And so I left Texas and moved to California and just started working in the area, learning about, all the different nuances in the tax law. And realized that no one else was really taking on this industry because it was just too strange. It had too many nuances. Each state was very different. But my background, was in state and local tax with Big Four accounting firms. And so I was comfortable working in multi-state environments.
Well, okay. So now that you are roughly how many clients do you have? Separate company, cannabis and hemp?
About 100 is about how many we have. So we're in this space, all in all, not only in California, but throughout the country. We have many clients that are MSOs, as we call them. They're multi-state operators, and so they have operations in multiple states, and some of them are publicly traded on the Canadian Stock Exchange.
So talk to me a little bit then tell me about the industry. What have you learned about the industry?
Well, the industry is changing constantly. And what was prevalent in a few years ago is now changing, and people's buying habits are changing. COVID changed many ways that cannabis companies operated because, on the good side, they were deemed essential businesses, so they were able to keep their shops open. But because of mass mandates and still fears about spreading COVID, many of the dispensaries had to shift to a delivery model, which was not part of their business plan. And so they started having curbside delivery. They started, having delivery to people's homes. And so the business is always changing. And I just got back from the Hamptons, where there was a cannabis expo there. And you just see everything that happened in California happening now in New York as they plan to get their regulations in place and people start getting their licenses and opening shops next year.
Are these small businesses that are starting, or are they large businesses that are now dropping their feet into New York? Who is in the business?
Yeah, and what generally happens is that as these new markets open up, as I was mentioning, New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, the tri-state area, but then you had Massachusetts that was legal a year or so ago, Illinois, Michigan, and as these new markets open up, many of the California cannabis companies are realizing that the market here is getting pretty saturated. There's a lot of competition, many opportunities to acquire cannabis. And so what they're looking to do is move their brand eastward. And just like you have brands for alcohol and tobacco and other, regulated type industries, cannabis is no different, where your brand can carry you very far and make your company get a valuation much higher than it would be if it wasn't a recognized brand.
Well, now we talked before about the goal that many of these companies had. We talked about helping companies get established when they get to a certain size, to begin helping them put together operating systems that are going to endure for a while. And you said that for the most part, that was kind of irrelevant, right?
Yeah, it's unfortunate because unlike other, startup industries where people want to, build a company, maybe a family business or something, because the cannabis business is very, you know, um, it's very collegial with one another, and in many cases, you'll see where the father has one part of the business, the mother has another, part of the business that she's working on. Maybe brothers and sisters are in the business as well. And you would think, hey, this is great. You're going to start like a family farm or something. But unlike strawberries and maybe some other types of agricultural crops, excuse me, cannabis, what many people want to do is to grow the business for 3 or 4 years, maybe 5, and then they want to sell to a much larger entity and basically cash out with their millions. They're not looking to set up a family legacy. And because of that, they're a little short-sighted, I think, because they're not looking at how to run their business efficiently, how to make their business better. They're just looking, how can I grow the top line number and then sell to the highest bidder down the road?
Yeah, and that's an interesting piece. How do people compete in this industry?
Well, I mean, they compete aggressively, but it's still a hometown kind of market. So that I had an instance last year where one of my clients during COVID had one of their machines break down, and they went down the street, literally down the street, to a competitor and said, "Hey, do you happen to have a part that would work for my machine?" And the other competitor not only had the part, but he sent his engineer to help install it. And that kind of collaboration is great, and this is one of the things I love about this industry. But as these entities get larger, they get bought out by bigger and bigger entities. It will kind of die off, I think, in the future.
What have you noticed about change from 10 years ago, 15 years ago to today?
Well, the public perception of cannabis has certainly changed dramatically, because before it was, the Nancy Reagan era of war on drugs, and you must keep your children away from drugs because it's a gateway to, cocaine and other more serious drugs. And I think now people realize that, there are many medical benefits to cannabis that, are just now beginning to be explored. There must be at least 100 different compounds in the cannabis plant, and none of them have been really tested fully and isolated for all the different uses that they can be, implemented for medical use. And so I think the, big pharma companies are now starting to, conduct more serious research in this area. And, for the longest time, the University of Mississippi was the only source to get legal cannabis for research purposes, which is kind of ironic that it would be, Mississippi, which is a very conservative state, but it's also a very humid and warm, state. So that, just like growing cotton, it's a great environment to grow cannabis as well.
Mm-hmm. What do you see as the future?
The future, I see it evolving somewhat like the microbreweries, where you had these small producers, producing small batches of product, and I see cannabis doing the same thing. There'll always be the Anheuser-Busch's and the large, entities that are, have a nationwide brand, but everybody's going to want that unique product that is, still tied to maybe a family that really has, small quantities available that they want to be able to tell their friends, hey, you can't just go into any dispensary and get this. I got a connection with somebody that can get us this stuff. And that's going to be, again, where branding and marketing is going to play a big role.
Is this still a market for entrepreneurs to get into?
Oh, yes, definitely. And I think that, one of the things that we're seeing across the country as new licenses opportunities open up is that social equity is playing a big role here, where, local governments and state governments are doing everything that they can to allow people of color and those that have been prosecuted for, small infringements of having, possessed a small amount of marijuana, that now they can go in and start up a business and get funding by others as well. And so this is a great opportunity to help these people that have been harmed by the war on drugs.
Uh-huh. Well, that's wonderful. That's great. And now I'm presuming that as these companies grow, they will be providing taxes for municipalities, right?
Oh, yes, indeed. And in fact, that's what, all of these municipalities are counting on, because when you think about the manufacturing industry, for instance, a lot of that has moved offshore to China and overseas. And so in these rural communities, there's not many opportunities for new job growth. Yet cannabis is the perfect industry for this, because, once a cannabis company gets involved in a community, now you've got lighting companies and fertilizer companies and electrical contractors and all these other industries are having to work and cater to that, cannabis company that is getting established. And that helps with the job market in those rural areas, because oftentimes you don't really, other than maybe a dispensary, you don't want to be in a downtown suburban area. You want to be, somewhere remote where you have lower costs.
Well, that's interesting. That's certainly along with what we've learned in COVID, isn't it? That you no longer have to be where the headquarters are. You can be remote and Zoom in.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's, again, creating just great opportunities for rural communities, to, get this business in there. And it helps, the diners and all the restaurants and, just other ancillary businesses as well in the community. And then, the taxes, as you were mentioning, is a huge part of it, because, I make the analogy of casino gambling. It used to be you had gambling in Las Vegas and Atlantic City, and that was pretty much it here in the U.S. But then, over time, gambling has evolved where now it's in every state, on all these different Indian reservations and everything. And the stigma has now gone. And that has now become sports betting online now, where they don't even have to have the physical presence anymore. And so I see cannabis going the same way, where, so much opportunity for these smaller communities to generate some significant tax revenue. And it's one of those voluntary taxes. So instead of increasing property taxes and other, income taxes to make ends meet, all they have to do is allow cannabis to be legal in their community. And then the tax proceeds from that will help pay for schools and all kinds of, beneficial programs.
Interesting. Well, how have what kind of resistance have you seen or have you heard from your clients? Resistance to cannabis or hemp in a locale?
Well, what I see is that there's certainly conservative districts, and one thing that people that don't realize, in California, when Prop 64 was passed in 2016, the local governments had the opportunity to opt in or opt out of allowing cannabis in their community, and they could decide, hey, we want cultivation, but we don't want dispensaries, retail stores in our location. And what they're finding out is that 80% of them said no, that we want no cannabis at all in our community. And now they're realizing that, well, it's not as bad as we first anticipated. The tax revenue is a good thing. And it's sort of like, dry liquor laws, where if I don't allow it in my county, the people in my county are just going to drive across the border to another county and get their product and bring it back into my county anyway. So I might as well take advantage of it and collect the tax revenue.
Yeah, it's a very interesting thing. I mean, I think a couple of things are happening. One is, as we remove that old reefer madness mentality and recognize that it is a plant and it's got some very healthful uses, and that it is not that it's not the drug itself that is the gateway drug, that's more of a community environment. And then moving away from this war on drugs, and then on top of that, to begin to understand that there's a monetary benefit to participating in this. That's a lot of pressure on city council.
There is. And, one area that is really, just needing more attention is the female market. Most of these brands, will have like some sort of aggressive packaging and labels and colors and things that are really geared to the, 21 to 35-year-old male. There are so many women that, gain benefits from cannabis, from being able to sleep and other things. Sometimes, they don't want to get like crazy high. They just want to relax, like, having a glass of wine, have maybe some cannabis that will, relax them. And there's, starting to become more and more companies that are gearing to the female market where their packaging is geared towards them. The dosage is lower. That's geared to, different moods that they may have and, want a different kind of effect than what a male wants, where they may just want to, have a big, high.
I interviewed Philip Rebentish from Got a Story, and he is dedicating his life to. He's got a site called "Don't Strain Yourself," and it's got to do with educating people on the medicinal values of cannabis, and then getting stories and having conversations with people about that. I think that's a really important piece to educate people, not necessarily increase sales, but to increase the well-being that people have.
Yeah, exactly. And, I think that, cannabis products can be used in many different ways. And like anything, it can be abused. But I think that, with more and more people trying it, using it, hey, they're starting to, infuse, foods and things with cannabis now. So you can have a cannabis dinner. And I think that it will become very similar to like wine. There'll be like certain areas where it's grown that you want to get your cannabis from. And there's just so many opportunities to use it in many different ways that we haven't even begun to explore.
Right. Well, all right. So what do you see as ancillary businesses starting up around, like going into some of these other areas?
Well, there's just so many businesses that work with the cannabis industry. There's like one company that produces drones that fly over a crop, and they can monitor, the moisture content and sunlight and everything, and knows, okay, this quadrant needs more sun and this quadrant needs more water. And, there's lighting companies, there's fertilizer companies, Scott's Liquid Green, the Scott's Miracle Grow, that's what I'm thinking about, is invested heavily into the cannabis industry and using their, know-how to help with fertilizers and things to grow a better product more efficiently. And so there's just our industry, accounting. I mean, there's just so many that are all like now working in this industry, helping them, as the market matures.
Do you see a change in the federal policy toward cannabis in the near future?
I have to say, and this is a personal note, Chuck Schumer's plan to legalize cannabis, it's all great, in a utopian society, but I think it's trying to get too many, things accomplished in one single bill. And I think that even the Democratic Party is having their own, conflicts about how far they want to go with legalization. And I would have much preferred, we get safe banking passed so that cannabis companies can have full access to banking services, which then gives a paper trail that allows accounting firms like us to be able to trace the money, allows them to pay their taxes, with a check or, through wire transfer, and they don't have to run to a local office with a bag full of cash. I
Well,
mean,
you have to
there's
go dig it up out of the ground in that big burlap bag, right?
yeah, well, and digging it in the ground is not such a great idea. We had one client that dug a hole in the ground, literally buried their money because they figured, hey, I'm right on top of it. It's safe. Well, they went to, get their money. And then, in a period of months, the money started to disintegrate because it's really, cash is really made out of cloth. And so you just buried cloth into the ground and it disintegrated. We have other clients that had pallets of cash stored in a warehouse, and rats got into the cash and started, eating away at the serial numbers. And if both serial numbers on a particular bill are gone, you can't take it to a bank or the Federal Reserve and exchange it for a new one. That money is literally gone.
Well, we need to get the banks involved with this.
Getting that and 280E is a tax code section that limits the ability for cannabis companies to deduct all of their expenses. And that would be a huge change too that would benefit the industry because they're working on very small margins once you factor in all these taxes. And that's what people don't realize. They think that, they're growing the crop for X dollars. They're selling it for, multiples of that. And therefore there's huge profits to be made. But once you factor in all the taxes, the taxes can be 40 to 45% of your gross income. That's huge. So that doesn't leave a whole lot.
Yeah, especially if you're gross. You're gross.
Exactly. Not your net income. And that's why many companies that are starting in this business are undercapitalized and they don't realize that, hey, if you got $1 million to start up a cannabis company, that's probably not enough. You probably need closer to $2 to $3 million to start a cannabis company because of all these unexpected taxes and costs.
Right. Well, all right. So are you looking for new clients right now?
Sure. We're always, looking for new clients. And what is surprising about this industry is I've seen new clients that start with $100,000 a month in sales. Next quarter, they're doing $10,000 a month in sales. And maybe by the end of the year, they're doing $1 million a month in sales. So the growth in this industry is astronomical. If you've got a good supply chain, a great product, and then it gets picked up by consumers and really appreciated, you can go very quickly, in this industry, unlike other industries where, it takes years and years to develop a product or something that achieves these level of sales.
Even on small margins.
Exactly. Yes. And that's why you got to have a good funding source, so that you can continue what you started, and that's what happens is oftentimes, they get going, but then they, have a bad crop or something, unexpected happens and they don't have any reserves to be able to continue on. And many of the licenses in California, for instance, are being sold now because during COVID, although it was great for the cannabis industry in terms of being able to stay open and make sales, if you didn't have a supply chain to be able to sell the product to consumers, well, then you couldn't make any profit because you had nothing to sell.
Right. Well, now, do you help people find financing?
We don't help people find financing, but what we do is we can help them with their finances so that a lender, an investor will be able to come in and make a prudent investment by seeing that, look, their books and records are correct. They have internal controls and policies and procedures in place. We know that, since this is a very cash-oriented business, that you got to have a close, policies and procedures surrounding cash so that you don't have 5 to 10% of your revenue going out the back door because your employees or whoever are stealing from you. So those are the kinds of things that investors are looking at to make sure that, hey, does management have their books, in order, and is it something that can be audited and verified?
So somebody who wanted to expand, wanted to find investors, or wanted to start up might find it very helpful to talk with you.
Yes, yes. I mean, and that's the thing is you want to get off started on the right foot, and that's where many companies, sometimes, don't think about accounting and don't think about some of these things as anything that is more of a nuisance. It doesn't generate any revenue for me. But it's these things that become very important down the road. And certainly if you're going to do an audit, if you were to say, hey, let's do an audit of our 2021, numbers now, well, we would have to go back to January 1 and determine what your beginning inventory is. Well, that's a very difficult thing to do now that we're here at the end of August to try to figure out what really happened between January and August of this year.
Mm-hmm. Now, and especially what you're doing sounds to me like the cannabis industry requires somebody who has a knowledge about the unique opportunities and also obstacles in this industry. It's not just a CPA who could say, here's how you do it.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many parts to it. It starts really at the beginning, working with the attorneys, figuring out what's the best corporate entity for you to have. Do you want to be a C Corp? Do you want to be a partnership? And that all depends on what are the investors' interests. If you're a partnership, you have what is called a flow through, and the losses or profits flow through to the investors. In the early years, those investors may want losses because most cannabis companies are going to operate at a loss at the beginning years. And then maybe later on and down the road, they may want to be a C Corp so they can be acquired by another C Corp and they can exchange stock for stock of the other company and maybe a tax-free exchange. So there's just many, considerations to think about. The corporate structure, taxes, everyone, has their own way of doing 280E, but you have to be able to support, how you're taking these different positions on 280E.
Now tell me about 280E. What is 280E?
So 280E is a tax code section that limits cannabis companies from taking only their cost of goods sold deduction, which is, all those costs used to produce a product is deductible, but marketing costs and general accounting, costs are not deductible. And that's a huge factor because that can be anywhere from, 15 to 25% of your expenses that you just don't get to take. So that, of course, increases your taxable income, and now you pay more tax.
What was the thinking behind that, do you think, is that just for cannabis companies?
No, it's all Schedule 1 drugs. So what happened was there was a case that, occurred, a while back, I want to say in the 70s, 80s, where someone, was paying their taxes, but they were taking all their deductions. Because as we know in Al Capone, the way he got busted was because he failed to pay taxes on all his illegal booze operations. So this guy did pay his taxes, but he was taking all his deductions. And the IRS said, we're not going to allow you to take all these deductions. We're not going to make this an easy endeavor for people to get into this business. So those drugs that are what we call Schedule 1 includes not only cannabis, but it includes cocaine and morphine and all of the bad, drugs that are out there. And that's one of the things that everybody is trying to change as well at the federal level, is to deschedule cannabis so it's no longer a Schedule 1 drug that can now take all the deductions that a normal business takes.
So that would be the route to eliminating this hurdle.
Yes, it would.
To what is it?
Deschedule.
Deschedule it from Schedule 1.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. All right. So you do a lot of looking around at the country. You have offices in a variety of places. What do you see happening in the country right now? In the people you're talking to, and I would assume many of them are in business, not all, but what do you see?
Well, I'm seeing that, this industry is expanding rapidly, particularly to the East Coast. And, Virginia has become the first true Southern state below the Mason-Dixon line to allow adult use consumption. And that's going to trigger all the other Southern states to fall in order eventually. And I think that, again, it all comes back to the tax revenue. Many, state and local jurisdictions see this as a ripe opportunity to generate taxes that's voluntary. If you don't consume cannabis, you won't be paying this tax. If you do consume, you will. And it allows these governments to limit whatever increases they may want to have in sales taxes and other types of taxes, and let cannabis be the entity that shores up their revenue base.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Well, during the opioid crisis, we certainly know that there were lots of people from West Virginia and that particular part of the world who would drive all the way down to Florida and bring back massive amounts to sell. So it's interesting when Virginia becomes a state that's has legitimate cannabis sales, it's people just going to go across the line to buy, and
the state patrol is not going to be able to stop every car and have like a checkpoint, to like see, and we're talking about, small quantities, enough that you could fit in your trunk, that it would be enough,
Right.
So I think that, that's the other thing is that I think that, cannabis is going to be something that is going to be across the nation eventually, but it's probably going to go on a state by state basis. I don't really see federal legalization happening anytime soon. And the other problem that happens with federal legalization that people don't realize is that each state set up these rules to protect their own industry. They don't want California cannabis being shipped to New York because, in New York, they're going to have to grow a lot of it indoors, and that's more costly. And they want to protect those people that have made those investments to get those licenses. And so you don't really want interstate commerce of cannabis.
So outside of cannabis and hemp, what do you see in terms of the business climate?
Outside in what manner?
Well, I mean, what you are in contact with lots of people. I'm sure you guys talk at Armanino about what you see. What do you see in terms of the business climate in the next 5 years? Well,
it's certainly a tremendous amount of growth that we've had. I mean, our practice has grown, over 250% year over year. And 650% the year before that. So, it is growing tremendously, and we don't see it stopping anytime soon. As these new states come on, there will be just more and more opportunities, for cannabis companies to expand their brand into these new jurisdictions.
Good. Well, what would you suggest to people? I guess there would be people who are currently involved in growing or selling, distributing cannabis, and another group would be those who are considering that. What would you recommend that they do?
Well, I think the ones that are already established certainly should, get their books and records in order, because one of the things that we're seeing is like these local taxes can be very tedious to deal with. And even the local jurisdictions don't even know how to administer some of their taxes, because the tax form says one thing and the regs say something else. And so you want to stay on top of that, because that's how you can lose your license. If you fail to pay your taxes, especially at the local level, that's when they'll shut you down. And you don't want that to happen and mess up all the hard-earned, dollars that you've made over the years. And new companies that want to, get established, I say, make sure that you're well capitalized, because it's going to cost you more than you think. There's going to be certainly delays in getting your license. As I mentioned earlier, social equity programs are out there, so that it does give an opportunity for anyone that really wants to get into this industry to do it. But the key for them is going to be to have an adequate funding source. So you need to have family, friends, investors, whoever, that are going to be able to, pay those bills in the early days, so that you can get this operation going.
Well, if they wanted to get in touch with you, how would they do that?
Sure. I'm at Armanino, and they can contact me via email is probably the best way to get a hold of me, which is mike.goral, Goral, at Armanino, ARMANINOLLP.com.
That's wonderful. It's been great talking with you, Mike, because this is certainly a fast growing part of the industry, and it's going to have a larger and larger impact on how we do business, not only in California, but all across the country.
It certainly is. And thank you again, Will, for having me on your show.
Absolutely.
You've been listening to The Pilgrim on the 405 with Will Christ. To hear more of the programs in this podcast, go to www.willchrist.com.